Hey y'all, welcome to our second April Friday Compliance Capers. It is Betty here along with my good friend and colleague Sonal Patel.
Hi, Betty. How are you? Good
I
morning.
am good. Nice to be in the springy months as we're all getting nicer and nicer, hopefully outside everywhere, right?
Yes, warmer, a bit warmer, and lots more rain, lots more wind up here. But at least the snow, knock on wood for right now, has dissipated. So, yeah,
Yes, we're looking for April showers bringing May flowers, right? Like from when we were kids.
that's right. Yep.
Oh, yes. But we are welcoming everybody here to our compliance capers for this Friday in April, where we're going to be highlighting and talking about a self-disclosure from a practice in Charlotte that self-disclosed about incident to services and not following the incident to guidelines correctly. So we wanted to kind of take the first part of this session, this episode, and actually talk about incident to guidelines. It is something near and dear to both Sonal and I, whether we like it or not, because I get the lure, so to speak, right, of incident to is because you can have a service that's done by your APP, but instead of getting the 85% payment, they get the full payment fee schedule as if it was the physician that was doing it.
Right.
So I understand that
Mhm.
who wants to just give away 15%
Right.
of the payment, right?
Right.
But there also are specific requirements to do that. And no matter how many times, and for this has been around for quite a while, the incident to guidelines, very rarely do I come across practices that are just perfect with this, and you wouldn't be able to find something in their records where they weren't followed. It seems like everybody continues to
Mhm.
have issues with incident to. Do you find, I'm probably pretty certain that you do, but how do you find it, Sonal?
Yeah, great question, my friend. And you're right. We both made a face, right? Incident two is a great concept. Yeah, it's great because, of course, we want our providers to get 100% reimbursement, right? Of course, makes sense. From a dollars and cents perspective, fine, I can get on board. However, I don't know one practice. I don't think I can name on one hand. I don't know any practice that successfully sends out claims with incident two. I don't know of a single practice. Right? The years of auditing, there's always an issue. There are so many details that go into compliantly documenting and then sending those claim forms out, right? Both parts have to be done compliantly. Um, because, like we've said time and time again here on Compliance Capers, VCMS will pay you. They'll pay your claims within
Yep.
2 to 3 to 4 weeks. Like I've said time and time again, I've heard myself say this, I think last week, the week before that, they will pay you. But eventually, an auditor on that side is going to look at the metrics on the CMS side, the volume of data coming in for those services billed as incident two, right? So there's so much that we advise practices do to clean things up, to better understand, the multiple things that are involved. And in this particular case, the number one factor of why they discovered and returned through a self-disclosure protocol was things were being billed out for new patient under these APPs. And, you just can't do that if it's incident 2. That MD, that physician, has to be the first person to look at the patient, evaluate the patient, treat the patient, make some sort of a wonderful care plan. What are they going to do with this patient? All of that has to be detailed first by the MD. So yeah, there's so many points that we can go over for incident 2, right? But yeah, in my opinion, no, I don't like this. It's been done wrong for, I don't know, quite a few decades now since the
Yeah.
benefit came out, incident 2.
Yeah.
So I'm not certain why it's just not done away with. Like, please CMS, let's just
Yeah.
get rid of that little section
Yeah.
completely,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not being done right.
Yeah, and it's just like anything else too. You look at the consultations when they weren't doing that
Mm-hmm.
right, they ended up
Yeah.
getting rid of them,
Yeah.
so I'm waiting for a modifier to come out that
Okay.
says it's incident 2,
Ooh,
because people ask me now,
great
they're
idea.
like, well, but they can't tell we're doing it incident 2. So how? And I said, well, okay, well, think about it. So you
Yeah.
have a physician
Yeah.
that is supervising multiple APPs
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the volume
Yes.
that gets admitted in claims
Yes.
for that MD
Yes.
looks like it's kind of like, I don't
Hmm.
think one person can see this many people in a day. I mean, there's ways that they can tell, but I really do think that they're going to come up with a modifier that just flat out this is incident 2, and we're going to have to start putting it on stuff, and they'll very easily be able to tell that we have incident 2 services, and then they'll be able to really pick it out a little bit easier. But the incident 2 guidelines are here on your screen, the link to the guidelines. And the important thing, as someone was saying, the physician has to see the patient and make down the treatment plan. That's the whole thing, because then the APP sees the patient incident to that treatment plan. So that's how you should think about it. That's what incident 2 really means.
Nice.
So to bill incident 2, the APP can't see new patients or new problems with established patients. Now, not that they can't ever see a new patient. They can. They just bill it under their own number and they take the 85%, right?
Yes.
But if you want to do an incident 2, it can't be a new patient, and that part of it, for the most part, I mean, I kind of calling myself out here because these guys did it wrong, but for the most part, the new patient part of it, everybody's like, oh yeah, we know when they're new patients, they can't do that. The part I find the most when I'm auditing is the established patients who are being seen, like for their psoriasis, their hypertension or whatever. And during that visit, it's either worse or something's changed. And then the APP changes their medication and still tries to bill it incident 2. I'm like, no. Okay, now the treatment plan's different. See, that's where it starts to get sticky, at least in most things when I look at it. But the place that we're going to look at today was kind of confused about all of it. But
Yeah.
I usually find it's when the established patients, and either they have to change the treatment plan or the patient complains about something else while they're there too. And so they also add something else in there. Well, again, now that's not incident 2 because there's no treatment plan for that. So if you're, billing that, and you can't bill 2 different E&Ms, one is incident 2 and one is not, because, you're seeing the same patient at the same
Mm-hmm.
visit,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I find that a lot of the mistakes get made is when they're seeing the established patients and just forget to kind of switch over and bill it under their own NPI number at that point. Do you find the same thing, that usually, I mean, the new patient, it's a new patient. It's pretty cut and dry. I figured.
Yeah, it is cut and dry in our experience, right? But I have seen so many practices get it wrong from the new patient standpoint as well. I think a lot of this has to do, in my opinion, in the practice suite itself, right? There's not enough um, good ways for the APPs to be able to convert or step out of the room, go get the doctor, right? Like I'm changing things. This patient has changed their problem. Things have suddenly gone sideways, right? So when you're actually in the office doing the work, I think there's so much disconnect that happens there. Obviously, you just want to be in the room with your patient, right? You don't, why on earth would you step out of the room and go say, I need the doctor? The patient is complaining about something else. I need a new treatment plan. That discussion just doesn't happen, right? So there has to be like a better way of doing things, which is why when we go in and we do the auditing, we simply say that, whoever is doing your coding, your billing out of claims should be identifying quickly that the patient went sideways. They're complaining about their ankle now. They came in for their heart. So, no, we need the doctor to do something else. We need another treatment plan, but that can't happen because you're the APP, right? So let's just bill everything out now under the APP. And we just take the 85%. That's wonderful. That's still reimbursement coming into the practice. Great, right? But not a lot of practices look at it like that, right? I said at the beginning, yes, we're all about the 100% reimbursement for you, the MD. Of course, we want that. But the, unnecessary risk, in my opinion, that Incident 2 places on so many practices is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think the way you said it earlier is spot on, is the risk, is kind of ballooned out. The spotlight is on based on the volume of that MD's NPI number going crazy for that one date of encounter, right? Because it's your APPs that are also doing a lot of this work. And so then your volume is just escalating to like well over 200 encounters in a day. And how is that really possible? So, when the payor looks at it like that, they're going to come back and take a really close look at what, on earth is going on at this practice. And in our particular case today, in North Carolina, I'm glad that they self-disclosed, right? And recognize that, yeah, we've got to clean things up. And again, hopefully they've put things into their compliance program, and we'll hopefully take practice into, okay, this is how I do Incident 2. This is how I do Incident 2, right? Again and again until they form the habit. But again, like we keep saying, I don't know a single practice that does it right. I don't know one that does it right.
And a big one, I mean, it's not part of what we're talking about today, because today we're talking about self-disclosures, but the other big thing I see with Incident 2, and I just want to say this for those of y'all that are doing this, it's a Medicare rule.
Medicare construct,
So
yes.
many payors do not follow Incident 2 guidelines. I have had multiple clients that have come to me and needed help because they got letters from commercial payors saying, we reviewed some of these records and noticed that the name on the medical record doesn't match the name on the claim form. Why is that? And their answer was, oh, it's Incident 2. And the payor says, okay, but we don't take Incident 2. It says on our site, it says in the provider handbook that if an APP can get a number, they need to get a number, and they have to bill us under their own number. So there have been a lot of paybacks because of that, because the commercial payor just doesn't accept Incident 2. So that's the other thing to be checking on. So if you are doing this and you're doing it with commercial payors, please check with those commercial payors and make sure they accept Incident 2 guidelines, because if not, that can be a bigger issue.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yep.
Now, before we talk about the the place in Charlotte that we're going to discuss, today with what they did. The link here, like I said earlier, that's got the incident to guidelines on it. And when you pull it up, they talk about the things that are required to meet incident to guidelines. And we had said already, one of them was that they can't see new patients or established patients with new problems, but if you go to that link, it'll list out in bullet points the things that you have to do and able to meet incident to guidelines. So they have to be an integral part of the patient's normal treatment when the physician or other listed practitioner personally performs an initial service and remains actively involved in the course of treatment. That's the other thing, the actively involved. And that one is very gray. What does actively involved mean? Well, for one practice, it might mean that the physician has to see the patient every third visit. Yep. For one, it might mean they have to at least annually see the physician. I mean, there's not a criteria that says actively involved means this. There's no definition for it. But Medicare loves to put stuff out there and not define it, don't they?
I know.
Yeah. Just think about the X modifiers. They had those, yes. They couldn't define them. They were out there, but we don't know. So it's the same thing here. They don't define actively involved, but that's important. And that's why some practices have the physician countersign the APP's notes, saying, here, I'm actively involved. It's showing you I read it, but, is that good enough? They don't define it. So, we don't know. But usually, you should make sure that they are seeing the physician. They shouldn't have the physician see them the first time and then never again and saying it's all incident to and they're actively involved. I don't think that, Medicare might not buy that, So make sure you have some protocol about it in your compliance plan.
That's right. Make one yourself. Make your own policy on incident to. That's right. Betty, that's great advice.
So also it says they have to be commonly provided without charge or included in the physician or other listed practitioner's bills. You can't have a surcharge for it being incident to. There are expenses to the physician, meaning they're taking up space, they're taking up time, they're taking up slot, they're commonly provided in the physician's office. So again, not for in the hospital, not for other places. Incident to is in the office. Split shared is what you do in the hospital, right? And then the physician or other listed practitioner provides direct supervision. Now, we talked about supervision on the last compliance capers when the chemo services came up. See how these all just tie together nicely once you start, seeing one after the other, right? But yeah, so it's direct supervision, which means that they have to be in the office suite, immediately available if there were to be an issue. So they can't be at the hospital seeing patients. They can't be at home. Now, there is still the exception with telehealth, that because of the pandemic, that they can be available, virtually or whatever, I think that runs out the end of this year, right, Sonal?
It does. It runs out the end of this year. I never really understood that direct supervision via like what we're doing
I don't get
on
the immediately
StreamYard
available.
or Zoom.
I mean, you can
I don't
be
get the immediately
available to
How are you going to
speak.
help me? How are you going to help me, sir, if I've fainted, I've fallen over, I'm having an infarct right here on my floor? How are you going to jump through the screen and help me? I never understand that. But God bless, it's here until the end of December 2024. So
yeah, and that's why I wanted to, because I'm sure every time I say that, if I forget about that, there's always somebody that types in or
types
says,
it in.
I thought so. Yes, that is.
I'm glad you CYA'd yourself. Yes, exactly.
And then,
but don't forget that direct supervision needs to be a physician, right? So if you're a solo doctor with a solo APP, right, you cannot just be out of the office playing golf somewhere, and just that nurse is inside the office. But if you happen to be a group practice, a group of MDs and a group of APPs, right? If you yourself happen to be away that day, you can still be directly supervised by the other physicians that are still working that day. So remember that as well. If you happen to try and perform these types of incident to services. If we haven't really made you jump off the cliff and say, oh my goodness, no, we will never do this again, based on these two. Yeah, we've scared them away, Betty.
But the other thing, and that is a great point, Sonal, because the other problem I find with incident 2 is that when they do that, then the claim goes out billed under the wrong physician.
Right.
That I hear
Correct.
a lot when I audit, and I'm like, okay, I see that Dr. Jones signed off on the note that day, but when I look at the 1500 form, it's got Dr. Smith's tax ID number on and NPI number on it. And I'll ask them, why did one physician sign, but this other physician, oh, well, because that's their supervising physician. Well, when they're talking about supervision here, they mean in the office at the time of the visit, not who contractually is listed as the supervising physician for this particular APP. That has nothing to do with this. This is about the billing. So for the billing, make sure it's the physician that was in the office that day. Because I actually had a case where they got in trouble. I don't want to say busted because they weren't like being sneaky. They were doing them under whoever their contracted supervising doctors were, and not who was in the office. And when the payers started to look at stuff, the contractual supervising physician was out on vacation, like out, like not even anywhere in the state, and they're billing things under. So like, how could they be billing these things when they're not even in the state doing, so that's where those things can start to trip people up. So, not only make sure you're doing it right, make sure it's being billed under the correct physician when you're doing it. And I had one client that said, yeah, but that really makes it messy for us to try to figure out who to give credit for with the blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, it makes it messier if you have to pay all of it back and get in trouble and have to pay fines, right? So whatever back end way that the practice has to kind of divvy up that stuff, y'all have to figure that out, because, you can't bill it under a physician that wasn't present in the office on the date of the encounter.
That's right.
So just keep that in mind. That's, that's my other thing. So the case is the Charlotte Gastroenterology and Hepatology practice. So, and we'll see, if you look at this one, they paid back $389,000. So it's a ton less than the one we looked at last week that was $17 million. So that's what I mean. I mean, these things, they don't have to be egregiously large. This one, I mean, not that $300-some thousand wouldn't hurt anybody, but I'm just saying in comparison, and this was for violating those incident to services. And Sonal, so this is the link to it. I couldn't make a banner out of it, y'all, because the link is too long.
The link is gigantic and it wouldn't fit. Yeah. So we developed a great workaround for this beautiful slide that has the link. So please, you can use that to pull up the little paragraph blurb on this particular practice in North Carolina that specializes in gastroenterology and hepatology. And like Betty said, they've agreed to pay back $389,000 and some change for allegedly violating the civil monetary penalties law. The OIG alleged that they submitted claims for services provided by advanced care practitioners, which are your physician assistants or your nurse practitioners, but billed as incident to a physician's service when the services did not satisfy the incident to requirements because they were for new patient visits or when there was a change to a patient's plan of care. So basically, those first two things that we were talking about, right? That's what they self-disclosed on. So, it can happen to anybody. This is a specialty practice, right? It can literally happen to anybody, to any specialty. No matter what you're trying to do, your main goal is you want that 100% reimbursement. We understand what you're trying to do, but you have to follow the playbook of CMS for the incident to construct because it is theirs and theirs alone. And like my good friend was stating earlier, the vast majority of commercial payors do not follow this construct. It's not theirs. There are a handful that create their own and they might call it something different. So pay attention to those types of things too, and play within their rule book as well if they happen to allow that, extra 15% reimbursement according to whatever rules they've created. So yeah, I thought this was a really, really great second compliance capers for the month of April that, we wanted to put the spotlight on something. Oh, I know that you and I have seen over the years that has just gone sideways on so many of the audits that we've performed, so many of the clients that we've tried to help. It's just rather a, large, incident to benefit that you have to be able to meet squarely for all points. You really do. You can't short yourself on any of the multiple points. Otherwise, you might as well bill it directly under the NPI number of your APP and save yourself this nightmare of a self-disclosure.
Yeah. It's, again, we're just kind of supposing with these self-disclosures because as we talked about extensively on the last episode, they don't, because they're fessing up, they found something and they're telling on themselves. They don't give out information on who did what and specifics and, because they're not calling anybody out for anything. So they just say, hey, they gave us money back because they said they finally did this and they stopped it, so, but I'm probably guessing that it's, since obviously they didn't know there was anything wrong with it, or they wouldn't have done it in the first place, that it's probably one of those like we get where we're doing an audit and one, an outside auditor kind of says, hey, they looked at these two things and it doesn't match. It is probably how it was found. And then, when you find something like that, then the practice says we always do that. That's the other thing I'm like, oh, please don't say
that.
Don't say it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we always do that. Oh, because then, you have to go and look at those things. If you've always done it and then you find you're doing it wrong, it's great that you stop it, but you're still responsible for all the past stuff you got paid on. So that's when you have to do those look backs and make sure that, get
a statistician.
Person.
That special person. Yes. We are not that special person, but we can help you find a statistician.
It's just one of my other words I can't say. So, thank you. And they can get to where you get a valid sample that will stick up to the extrapolation and the amount that you end up paying back. So, but that's what you have to do. You got money you didn't deserve and you know it, so I'm sure if you paid somebody to do something for you and you overpaid them, you would be very happy if that person came back to you and said, hey, you paid me too much for this. Here's, your couple $100 back, or here's your whatever back. That would be great. And that shows you the integrity of that person. But they're not going to come and say, "Hey, I noticed you overpaid me by $1,000. Thanks," and walk away. You're going to want that money back, right?
That's right.
So they didn't deserve it. They did it, and they didn't do it on purpose, but they still don't deserve it. So you do have to pay that stuff back. And if it comes to an amount like that one last week that was over 17 million, not too many places have an extra $17 million laying around that they could just oh, we'll just, write you a check. They do allow, just like with anything else, they'll, especially if you self-disclose, so you're fessing up. So it's going to be like, okay, well, we'll do payment plans, or we'll do whatever, they work it out with you when you're doing it. But yes, you've got to give that money back. It's the right thing to do.
Absolutely, Betty. It's the right thing to do. Spot on. Last week's case was massive, 17 million. This was much more manageable. Again, because it was an office-based type of service, like you hinted at as well. It's office-based, like you have to have your place of service match up. That's another thing that we have heard time and time again, the crossover, the missed messaging of this is just like split shared. Like, no, it is not the same, and the terminology is used here in the office space as well. I'm just doing a split shared visit. No. So, there's a lot of nuance and details that our providers need to, I guess, just help get a better handle on what these various terminologies are and where they're actually applicable, right? Based on all of our various guidelines imparted by the CMS, right? Completely different. So, I don't know, as the weeks go by here in the month of April, we might come across a case on hospital stuff for self-disclosure. I don't know what we have up our sleeves, but there's a lot of things that my good friend and I here can talk about, again, in a very hypothetical way, because these are small documents of information, because these entities have done the right thing in good faith. Like we stated at the beginning of the month, in good faith is a very good thing. You're looked upon really, really favorably in the eyes of the OIG when you go in with this process, wanting to do the right thing. And you followed all of their multiple steps, to, conduct the quality extrapolation. You followed all of their steps on obtaining a sample, and then you quantify whatever that overpayment is. All of that work is looked upon favorably by the OIG in these types of SDP cases. So, I think this case as well happens to pinpoint the facts that just because you did incident 2 wrong, it's better that you, fess up and you've identified the multiple laws that you might have triggered, etc., like we talked about on the first episode this month. So I think this is a really good case as well in North Carolina that I think a lot of people in our audience can take away and learn something from, I hope, on how to better bill and document for incident 2 types of services.
Yes. And once again, time for me to beat the dead horse. How do you probably think this was found? I bet on the audit. So instead of it continuing to go on and on and on, and then Medicare catching it and coming after the practice, the practice found it and took the right steps to stop and correct it.
That's right.
So, make sure that you're looking at records. Look at your records, set up an audit program. If you can't do it internally, and it doesn't have to be half the practices records every month. I mean,
No,
make sure you're
goodness,
spot
no.
checking your problem areas. If you can't do it, go look for consultants that can and get you on a schedule. It should be part of your audit and compliance program, which everybody should have again, right? So these are all things that we should have. And audits is one of them. It's a very important way to catch things before they get out of hand and before they get to a level where it really, really could hurt a practice to where, they're like, I don't know how we can, keep our doors open. Blah, blah. I mean, I've actually heard that because once the payor caught it, it had been going on for more than a decade. Whereas if you have regular audits, chances are, even if they're randomized, it's going to get caught at some point, definitely over a decade, that it's randomly going to come up at some point. So it's so important, y'all. So if you can't do it internally, find a trusted, consultant that can do it for you, get you on a good program and get your education, all that kind of good stuff, and keep you on the straight and narrow. But these are just different things we're picking out to kind of point out to the practices to kind of say, maybe I need to check on that. Right.
That's right, Betty. Really great points. No, you don't sound like a broken record. I think internal audits are a must. These particular cases that we're going to be talking about this entire month, I celebrate these types of practices because they took initiative. They, had auditors come in, identify the issues. They were like, oh boy, it's a good thing, right? So what we try to advise here on Compliance Capers is practices and entities can do it themselves so much faster in a month. Like you stated, these random spot checks, right? If you just do spot checks, we're not suggesting that you go out and audit yourselves like, 300 records in a month. We're not saying that. We're saying, manageable spot check internal audits so you can make sure that you are capturing each individual service line at your practice. You're making sure that it's being done correctly the first time. And then if there is an issue, you catch it right away during that audit number one that you've had. Like, oh, there's something not quite right here, right? And you've already identified it and you can make a swift corrective action. If not, be able to file a corrected claim, right? Or make an addendum to your documentation timely. There are so many things that you are still able to do because you are conducting that monthly self-audit. So I agree with everything you stated because I think these types of audits only help a practice grow. I think it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what you got paid, you're keeping.
And you're
that'd be a good
keeping the
feeling,
money. That's right. That's a great feeling. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, thank you. This was a good session, another good episode today. And thank y'all for tuning in and watching with us. And we hope, as always, that y'all are gathering some good, practical, straightforward information to help you out in your practices. And are always happy to converse and go back and forth with things in the chat, for these and talk with y'all. And next week, we are going to be looking at ones that we're giving away free things. And it kind of got them in a little bit of trouble. So again, something else you got to make sure you're doing right. So until next Friday, I hope everybody has a good afternoon and a great weekend. And Sonal, same to you. And do you want to say anything finally here?
You, my friend. No, I thought this was a great session. I think our audience can really get a lot of key takeaways and nuggets that we made throughout our conversation on Compliance Capers. I'm looking forward to another self-disclosure on the free, and and some bonus payments as well for next week's episode, because, I don't know what we're going to find out, but we will definitely be talking about it next week. So yeah, thank you so much, my friend. I loved today's episode, and I can't wait to hear what we're talking about next time on Compliance Capers.
Wonderful.
So,
good.
Thanks, my
All
friend.
right. Thanks, y'all. And we will see you on Compliance Capers next Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye.